Hey everybody, tonight's video is called Insurrection and Murder, and tonight we continue our pass-through study here in the book of Jeremiah, where we're going to be looking at the insurrection and murder of Gedaliah the governor. So we are going to be in Jeremiah chapter 41, and it's going to be another fairly short video, probably no more than 10-15 minutes. So in chapter 41, we're going to look at starting out with verses 1 through 4, and it says, "Now it came to pass in the 7th month that Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, of the royal family and of the officers of the king, came with 10 men to Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, at Mizpah. And there they ate bread together at Mizpah. Then Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, and the 10 men who were with him, arose and struck Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, with the sword, and killed him, whom the king of Babylon had made governor over the land. Ismael also struck down all the Jews who were with him, so that is with Gedaliah at Mizpah, and the Chaldeans who were found there, the men of war. And it happened on the 2nd day after he had killed Gedaliah, when as yet no one knew it." So we see in the 2nd month after the city of Jerusalem was destroyed, was burned, the careless governor entertained Ishmael's group, and when he failed to act with the threats that he knew, as we covered in yesterday's chapter, when he failed to act with the threats of the intelligence, we see that there's a massacre. He invited a massacre. And so Ismael and his 10 men, they murdered the governor that was appointed by the king of Babylon, as well as those who were around him of the Jewish people, and also the Babylonian men of war that were there to protect the governor, so the bodyguards, if you want to think of it that way, or secret service. And Ismael did this because Baalis, the king of the Ammonites, had hired him to do so. And Ismael was of the royal family, a descendant of David. And Ismael and his men had so effectively killed the men at the Mizpah settlement that it took some time of the news to be able to travel of the murder to be known. And we see there's the shaving of the beard, which is a very common Old Testament practice when it comes to deep mourning or deep grief. And also cutting themselves. In verse 5 through 7, it says that certain men came from Shechem, from Shiloh, and from Samaria, 80 men with their beards shaved and their clothes torn, having cut themselves with offerings and incense in their hand, to bring them to the house of the Lord. Now Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, went out from Mizpah to meet them, weeping as he went along. And it happened, as he met them, that he said to them, "Come to Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam." So it was when they came into the midst of the city that Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, killed him and cast them into the midst of a pit, he and the men who were with him. So most likely this group of 80 men had come into mourning over the destruction of Jerusalem that takes place. And so servants were led, 50 servants were led to the slaughter. And he did amazing damage with only 10 men. And eventually they must have acquired more to do than what was described in verse 10. And we see the house of the Lord, which is also known as the temple, was destroyed, but the Temple Mount was still regarded as holy. And they brought offerings and sacrifices there in verse 5. And the wicked and heartless Ismael in verse 6 knew how to put on a show, and he knew how to seem harmless in approaching the group of men. And Ismael and his gang, verse 7, murdered as many as they could from this group of worshippers, and cruelly threw their bodies into a cistern. In verse 8 through 10, it says, "But 10 men were found among them who said to Ismael, 'Do not kill us, for we have treasures of wheat, barley, oil, and honey in the field. So they desisted and did not kill them among their brethren. Now at the pit into which Ismael had cast all the dead bodies of the men whom he had slain because of Gedaliah was the same Asa the king had made for fear of Baasha the king of Israel. Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, filled it with the slain. Then Ismael carried away captive all the rest of the people who were at Mizpah, the king's daughters. And all the people who remained at Mizpah, whom Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, had committed to Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, and Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, carried them away captive and departed to go over the Ammonites. And so among the 80 men who came to Mizpah from the north, 10 were able to persuade Ismael to spare their lives in exchange for all the good things they brought to sacrifice and to offer to the Lord. And in verse 9, the king Asa ruled Judah between 911 and 863 or 873 BC, and you can find more about him back in 1 Kings chapter 15, verse 11 through 16. And in verse 10, Ismael, he took the survivors and the slaves and the servants to the Ammonites, most likely to sell them as slaves to their foreign king. And the king's daughters were members of Zedekiah's court. They were not just the king's own biological daughters. And as part of the former alliance against Babylon, the Ammonite action is itself under God's judgment. In verse 11 says, But Jehoan, the son of Kareah, and all the captains of the forces that were with him heard of all the evil that Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, had done. So Johanan brought the original intelligence about the plans for the coup to Gedaliah. In verse 12 through 15, they took all the men and went to fight Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, and they found him by the great pool that is in Gibeon. So it was, when all the people who were with Ismael saw Johanan, the son of Kareah, and all the captains of the forces who were with him, that they were glad. Then all the people whom Ismael had carried away captive from Mizpah turned around and came back and went into Johanan, the son of Kareah. But Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, escaped from Johanan with 8 men and went to the Ammonites. So Johanan heard of Ishmael's murders and taken people captive, and he brought men to stop him. And they freed the captives, but Ismael and his men escaped. And Ismael, he took all the citizens of Mizpah with him on his flight to Ammon, so that he has been unable to travel so quickly. And Gibeon is about 3 miles from Mizpah, and from here through chapter 44, you see Jeremiah is taken to Egypt by Jewish survivors fleeing from the possible Babylonian retaliations. And so Ismael was so violent and wicked that he had his own men frightened, kind of like the Hitler of the time, in a way, that his own people were afraid of him. And Ismael and his 8 men made it to the Ammonites. In verse 16 through 18, to finish the chapter, says, Then Johanan, the son of Kareah, and all the captains of the forces that were with him, took from Mizpah all the rest of the people whom he had recovered from Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, after he had murdered Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the mighty men of war, and the women, and the children, and the eunuchs, whom he brought back from Gibeon. And they departed and dwelt in the habitation of Chimham, which is near Bethlehem, as they went on their way to Egypt, because of the Chaldeans, for they were afraid of them, because Ismael, the son of Nethaniah, had murdered Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, but whom the king of Babylon had made governor in the land. So Gedaliah's death created a power vacuum. And the former military officers who take fear of Babylonian reprisals and decide to flee the relative safe of Egypt, Johanan and his men brought the survivors from the Mizpah massacre. And they brought them up to near Bethlehem to Chimham. And so to wrap up tonight's video, very short, we look at the assassination of the governor Gedaliah. In verse 4 to 7, we see the murder of the men who came to sacrifice. And we see in verse 8 through 10 that Ismael took the captives of survivors and the returns to the Ammonites. In verse 11 through 13, we see the rescue of the captives and the escape of Ismael with the response of Johanan. In verse 16 through 18, we see Johanan's leadership as the chapter closes out. And that's going to wrap up today's video. We'll see you next as we'll be looking at the insincere request for guidance, and that will be on Saturday. So I hope that you have a great rest of your week. God bless, and we'll see you this weekend.